And today, Arthur and I are going to discuss, well, first of all, I'm going to do a quick recap of what virtualization is as far as our experience. I'm going to talk a little bit about VMware and the Broadcom acquisition of VMware. And then we're going to look at what are the alternatives, like um, looking around sort of what are the options out there to swap with VMware. And then finally, a little bit about HPE's VM Essentials offering. So in terms of how virtualization's evolved, well, way back in the dawn of time, everything was on physical servers. So if you wanted to put something on the internet, it would be a rack mount server, and it would be most of the time would be in a data center, and it would be connected with a network cable, and it would be running most likely Windows or Linux, and you would be running your web server software on there, and that would be the end of the story. So this took a lot of resource investment to operate. You have to pay for power and rack space, connectivity and cabling, and a lot of the time your web server, if that's what it was, would be sitting idle because a big physical box has a lot of CPU processing capabilities and a lot of spare RAM that doesn't get utilized for that purpose. There was a sort of middle ground here for digital and web customers. It's called shared hosting. So you would run your web server, you would have in that directory, you'd have a lot of subdirectories, and each one of those would be a website. And that could be a different customer that with a different website, with a different storefront. But that was really, really insecure, and it wasn't a good way to divide up resources. So in parallel with this, and typically in the Unix space, there was this concept of running virtual machines on the same physical box. But what happened was that hypervisor providers started to get better and better at doing that, and it became an option to run instead of a physical machine running Windows with a web server on it, you could actually run a bare metal hypervisor, which is basically a big time slice distributor of system resources, and you could spin up virtual machines which would run operating systems all on their own, and you could dedicate that virtual machine to a customer. And using some clever technologies like VLAN segregation, you could essentially give someone their own network tenancy, and they would have the flexibility of choosing exactly how big they needed their server to be in order to run correctly. Just going to refer quickly to some of my notes here. Yeah, so why would you typically do this? Well, you get to make use of all of the physical resources that are running on the box. So you've got 16 CPU cores. You can run, technically speaking, you could run any number of VMs on that, and each of them would take a share of that hypervisor's attention in terms of time slice. So you get a big cost reduction. You get an efficient use of your compute resources. You get the ability to orchestrate your workloads. You run multiple hypervisors. One of them dies, that virtual machine can be spun up on another one, and you get a fairly graceful recovery, even though you've technically only got one machine and you don't have any application intelligence there. So you get the agility and the portability of your workload. And then you get technology that integrates well with that virtualization. You get to take a point in time snapshot of that machine. You can do an important upgrade. You can test it out, and then you can say, oh, it broke something. And then you can just quickly roll back in time with really no extra loss. So on top of that, you get integrated backups, you get network orchestration, you get distributed load balancing, you get firewalling, and you get disaster recovery. So if you're in the digital and web space, it made sense. And if you're an enterprise, it also made sense. So maybe you have a mail server, maybe you have a print server, maybe you have corporate Active Directory. All of this stuff lends it well to virtualization. You could suddenly run everything you need for an office environment on one or two physical machines rather than having to have an entire suite of hardware there backing you. So how does VMware fit into this picture? Well, for us as an MSP, virtualization makes complete sense. So we get the economy of scale, we can deploy clusters of hardware nodes, we can essentially get an enterprise architecture, we can pick fiber channel storage with shared storage, and we can run customer workloads segregated into tenancies, and we get the economy of scale in relation to that. VMware was I guess you could say they were the first enterprise hypervisor to market. So they got there first and they did it better than most other suppliers. And then over the years, they developed a rich ecosystem of products. So not only did you get your virtualization and orchestration technology, you got automation, you got advanced load balancing, you got distributed port groups, and you got a whole ecosystem of monitoring and other products that go along with that. So I guess we had 10 good years, and then VMware made, I want to say, some questionable choices with regard to where they invested their money. So Tanzu is one particular thing. Everyone was raging about containers, and VMware invested a lot of money into container orchestration, and their customer base didn't really take them up on that. It didn't really align with that sort of traditional infrastructure model that people were using, and they were pushing good money after bad towards that. And secondly, they were hampered by the way that they did partnering. So they didn't really refuse partner status to anyone. It was just a tiered pricing model, and they had a lot of small partners, and there was a huge amount of administrative overhead that I think in the end overburdened them a little bit. And they ultimately became an attractive target for a business takeover. So Broadcom saw this opportunity, snapped it up, and then we immediately saw a change. So Broadcom divested itself of all the aspects of VMware that they didn't like. So they pretty much got rid of Tanzu, they got rid of Carbon Black, and then they started on a strategy of what I'm going to call aggressive simplification. So they decided, we're going to make licensing really simple. We charge you for the number of cores you use on every physical host, and we charge you a minimum number of cores per host. So all those managed service providers out there who were trying to sweat their hardware, running 2x8 core hosts in a large fleet, well, they got completely screwed over by this. And fortunately, AC3, we run a fairly compute dense environment. We run blade servers and we run a high core count. Nevertheless, we had a number of environments that we had to rapidly reconsider and look for alternatives. And the other thing that Broadcom did was they decided they weren't going to partner with anyone who wasn't doing a huge amount of business. So AC3, I guess you could say we're small medium. We have a number of customers, but we're not a massive partner of VMware. So we've had to find an aggregator and essentially sublet licensing from them, which is really inconvenient for us. And we no longer have a direct support relationship with VMware. And there's a whole bunch of things about the relationship that change. We don't have a technical account manager, and essentially Broadcom don't care about us anymore. We don't matter. We're just subleasing these licenses from another provider. So we've had to basically evaluate our entire environment again. What does it mean for us? So first of all, well, as a managed services provider, our core business is running a thin margin and being efficient with our products. So we have to get rid of any VMware product that we're paying for, which isn't serving a customer. So what does that mean? Our management environments, our critical firewalling infrastructure environments, and some of our other network environments can't really run VMware because they're not directly associated with revenue. So we have to think, what other hypervisors are out there? We optimize everything we can. We look at our footprint, and then we say, where's it going to go? So this brings us to, what are the alternatives? Well, we did a lot of research into this. We spent a lot of time thinking about it. And really, there are two main ones. And it's whether or not you want to have a Windows-based hypervisor or a Linux-based hypervisor. And in this case, in our company, we have the team that are currently managing VMware. We're best suited to deal with Hyper-V, which is the Windows-based hypervisor, and our site reliability engineers, the automation guys, the Linux gurus, they're much better suited to manage KVM. So we've got this bifurcating pathway. What wants to go on what? We look at Hyper-V, it's basically got feature parity with VMware with a number of flaws. So first of all, Microsoft haven't really been developing Hyper-V for about 10 years. Second of all, it's not quite as good. The virtual motion capability, the ability for virtual machines to move smoothly between hosts, is not as smooth. And because it runs on Windows, it's subject to Windows monthly vulnerabilities. And what you do not want with a hypervisor is to be having to patch a mission critical environment on a monthly basis for security reasons only. So you're not getting any new features. You're just trying to deal with new zero-day vulnerabilities. For this reason, we did not find it suitable as an alternative to our mainstream hypervisor. There were a couple of places where it made sense. There's some of our backup environment needs virtual machines, and we've run Hyper-V standalone hosts for that, but it's a very niche use case for us. Which brings us to the Linux-based alternative, which is KVM. So KVM's free. It's open source virtualization module built into Linux kernel. So instead of being a bare metal hypervisor like VMware, it runs VMs as regular Linux processes under the basic Linux OS scheduler. And each of these has dedicated virtual hardware in the same way that you have a VM on another OS. It benefits from the security and the consistency with normal Linux host features. It has hardware-assisted virtualization, and it has hypervisor integration drivers, VirtIO. And yeah, it has a lot of flexibility in relation to how you need to run the environment. So how you want to deploy the shared storage and this kind of thing, KVM has those options. What it does not have is an orchestration platform to go with it. So there are a number of these, and it's basically all the vendors that use KVM have written their own version of this. So why are we choosing KVM? Well, for these reasons. So it actually does have a rich ecosystem. It does have wide support for the kind of deployment options you want, and it's cheap. A lot of vendors are investing in this, and it's only growing in support. But it's not without its problems. So people that have been managing largely GUI-based environments, VMware has an excellent management pane. It probably has the best management pane that I've seen amongst the vendors. This is not quite as well fleshed out with the other vendors. And a lot of times there isn't the management skill there amongst the administration user base. So it's a, what do you call it? It's a high learning curve. It's a steep learning curve. And when it comes down to it, you don't get the same broad product suite that you get, the one-stop shop that you get with the other hypervisors. So you do have to work within a smaller set of features. And the final thing about this is that it's not so easy to get your workloads onto KVM smoothly. You can get the files and the data over and you can convert them, but then you need to flip over the embedded hypervisor drivers, and you need to do some refactoring as far as the virtual machine deployment itself. So there's a bit of a headache getting your workloads over to this. To be fair, that would be true of any other hypervisor pretty much, but it's nevertheless a headache you need to resolve in terms of moving to this platform.
Hey, thanks, Steve.
You're back,
Let me
Arthur.
evaluate I am back. I apologize, everyone. I don't enjoy hotspotting to my mobile phone over 4G. I'm sorry, everyone. When we look at our KVM platform options, we see these as three sort of broad categories: pure KVM, managed KVM, and VMs as containers. Pure KVM is where you take a regular hardware device, you install Linux, you enable KVM, and you start running VMs. You might add more hardware hosts as you need to. You may or may not have shared storage. This gets you all the KVM features, but the user and administration experience is pretty poor. Managed KVM is where you source a platform from a vendor. So that's where something like HPE's VM Essentials or Proxmox or the open source project Overt, which is then packaged by other vendors like Oracle. Each of these are sort of managed KVM platforms with their own web interface, their own user experience. And this is where you often get the more advanced features bundled in, like software-defined networking. Each have their own strengths and weaknesses, but they're often the most cost-effective option as the vendors give you support for the hypervisor hosts and they take care of sort of platform licensing. Lastly, we see VMs as containers. This is the really complicated end of town, but it's a really good option if you've already got managed Kubernetes platforms that support it. This is things like SUSE Harvester or OpenShift. There are some, we say, sort of performance uncertainties with this model. Really reliable features like persistent storage volumes, they're not as performant as pure KVM or managed KVM. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Arthur. Glad to have you back. So, because of pricing pressure mainly, you need to consider what it means to move away from VMware. So there are features that you can achieve parity with in terms of the other platforms, but you really need to consider how exactly you're going to do that. There's no set playbook for this necessarily yet. If you're using NSX for your network segmentation and orchestration, then that needs to be considered. If you're using advanced load balancing, that needs to be considered. If you're using vSAN to handle your shared storage, maybe you can find a different shared storage solution. Maybe that's Fiber Channel, maybe that's NFS, if that's the simplest version. If you're using vRealize operations, then known as ARIA operations, it's, are you using it for monitoring? Maybe you need to think about a different form of that. Yeah, all of these things need to be weighed up. Maybe you're using integrated Active Directory authentication. Maybe that's not available on the new platform. Most of them will do secure LDAP, but you do still need to look into that. And do they do SAML? Are you using SAML with your Entra ID deployment? Maybe the new one doesn't do that so well either. A lot of these platforms will claim to have a certain feature, and then you go to use it and you think this isn't exactly what we need. It just doesn't quite have that extra checkbox that we've always had in place. Backup tooling is usually pretty flexible. A lot of things did deeply integrate with the VMware ecosystem. So Commvault, for instance, full VM snapshots, Veeam snapshots. A lot of that stuff does work with other hypervisors, but the specifics need to be ironed out. Disaster recovery tooling, this could just be replication technology at the hypervisor level. HP's has gotten pretty good with that, but we've never tested it. So we need to evaluate that for ourselves, make sure that we can wrap our heads around how it works exactly. Maybe you've got monitoring that hooks into the vSphere inventory via the API, which is really, really handy, but maybe you don't have that view anymore. So you need to consider what exactly you're going to do about that. And then maybe you've got automated reporting or some kind of routine reporting that you use tooling that integrates well with vSphere for. What are you going to do about that? So these things all need to be considered. So yeah, there are answers to most of these questions. Commvault and Veeam are fairly agnostic. They'll hook into most things. In the worst case of Commvault, you can actually just install the iData agent on something, and that does an excellent job. Veeam, likewise, Veeam is more hypervisor centric, but it supports a lot of different hypervisors. There are other DR capabilities you could consider instead of the sort of hypervisor failover level DR. You could look at LUN level replication. You can look at agent-based replication, where something sits in the file system and does asynchronous block transfers, all this kind of stuff. Agent-based monitoring, actually, Oddly enough, as handy as vSphere is to hook into that API, agent-based monitoring really is kind of the gold standard. It's just that you can get away with a lot if you've got view of the inventory. And I've mentioned elbow grease here because yeah, it does take a fair amount of effort to refactor some of this stuff. So since the Broadcom takeover, you end up with this kind of weighing up your options scenario where you've got, if you're sticking with VMware, you just have unstable vendor pricing. Can you really trust Broadcom not to introduce sweeping new changes at any point? We're not sure. We can't trust them anymore, and it costs us a lot to stay with them. So we look at KVM. It's powerful, it's flexible, and it's cheaper if you can put the effort in to manage it. So this neatly takes me back to a product which does do some of the stuff we're talking about, which is HPE VM Essentials. Arthur.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's a slightly unwieldy product name, HPE VM Essentials. Everyone just calls it VME. And VME came about when HPE acquired a company called Morpheus Data a few years ago. HPE was already using some of the Morpheus software for their GreenLake product interface. And Morpheus itself provides a management web interface and an API that HPE used to manage their own KVM hypervisor called HVM. Out of the box, and interestingly, the VME product supports managing the HVM hypervisor as well as VMware. So you can get a single view of a mixed hypervisor platform. I won't name a price because I'm sure I'll get it wrong, but it's low, and more importantly, it's really easy to understand. It's a certain number of dollars per physical socket per year. It's easily digestible. HPE also provide a migration tool for VMware to HVM. Within the Morpheus web interface, it allows you to create a run book of sorts where it gives you the pre and post migration steps, and then it takes care of sort of transforming the disk image and the VM spec into the format that HVM needs. Back to Steve's topic of those third-party integrators, HPE is getting quite a lot of vendors on board for these integrations. Some really important early contributions here from Commvault, which allow for your existing backup solutions and so on to keep working in a new environment. If we remember that Morpheus is just the management plane, you can upgrade Morpheus to something they call the Morpheus Enterprise application. This doesn't really change VM Essentials or the HVM hosts, but it adds a lot of these enterprise management features to the platform. So you get public cloud management. So you can do most common operations on most of the big public cloud vendors. And you get a Kubernetes runtime service. You can run your own Kubernetes platform either on HVM or using the public cloud connectors to things like AKS in Azure. You also get multi-tenanted RBAC support, which is important for service providers and the like. You get a approval and policy engine. This lets you do things like nominate power users that can do a whole bunch of features, and maybe a small contingent of users that need oversight or an approval workflow to run for various activities. You get a FinOps engine. So you can use this to try and calculate the cost of running specific applications or individual virtual machines. You get infrastructure as code blueprinting. You get a task automation engine, so you can schedule jobs, to apply over the whole fleet or certain subsections. You can run ad hoc jobs. Of course, there is a cost increase, but it's still in this per socket per year model. It's really easy to calculate. Back to Steve.
Hi, guys. Yeah, I just wanted to mention as far as Morpheus goes, it does integrate with a lot of different things. It's built to essentially handle a meta level view of hypervisor plane management. It's a very flexible product, and you can extend it to do almost anything. So yeah, we've got a little code here you can scan if you wish to book in a discovery call to figure out how this can assist. And thank you very much for attending today. If you've got any questions, please reach out in the Q&A channel, which I'm just about to check, and we'll do our best to address them.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Apologies again, lack of video.
All right, thanks so much for attending, everyone. I guess we'll wrap this up shortly. I've got a hand up from
The question.
Vince. Do you want to empower them to speak?
Oh, maybe they've gone.
Edwin's here. I just can't see them. Can we?
You should be able to type in the Q&A chat channel if you have any questions. Steve and I will be around. Otherwise, yep, QR code will take you to our website. We can book us in.
So, question from Edwin:
Yeah.
How does the tool HPVME handle large scale during migration from VMware?
Pretty well. I think they have a self-imposed limit of about 20 concurrent migrations in their sort of runbook format. The real holdup is usually transferring the disk images. So there's a little bit of pre and post prep, but that's pretty quick. It's the sort of copying your giant VMDKs around over the networks, often the slowest bit. But yeah, I think it's 20 concurrent migrations. I hope that answers your question then.
I've just sort of typed that out in summary, Arthur.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. All right. Well, I think if we don't have any other questions coming in, we'll leave this QR code slide up for a little bit. But otherwise, thanks everyone for attending.
Go ahead, Edwin, if you want to type your question out. Are there any specific versions from VMware vCenter and vSphere supported for importing VMs or Tanzu pods or nodes?
Well, Tanzu is probably its own issue there. I don't think there's any native support for migrating out of Tanzu. In terms of support for viewing VMware, I don't know. I think it's all of the 6, 7, 8 branch, to be honest, but we would have to double check.
You're welcome. Thanks, Edwin, for joining. All right, I'll close off the event at this point. I think, guys, please feel free to engage with us. You've got the QR code, and thanks very much for attending.
Thanks, everybody.